Good afternoon. Welcome to the City Club Forum. I'm Nelson Weiss, President of the City Club of Cleveland. Today, our forum speaker is Mr. Charles J. DiBona, President and Chief Executive Officer of the American Petroleum Institute. Mr. DiBona has held this position since January 1st of 1979 and was for the previous 5 years its Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer. The American Petroleum Institute is the oil industry's largest association. It collects statistics, issues standards for oil field equipment and operating practices, and sponsors training programs. In addition, it undertakes studies that analyze the impact of proposed laws and governmental regulations affecting energy supplies. Mr. DiBona is a native of Quincy, Massachusetts, a graduate of the United States Naval Academy. He was a Rhodes Scholar from 1957 to 1960, earning advanced degrees in philosophy, politics, and economics. He served in the Navy from 1956 to 1967, resigning with the rank of lieutenant commander. From 1967 to 1973, he was president of the Center for Naval Analyses, affiliated with the University of Rochester. In 1973, Mr. DiBona was a special consultant to President Nixon and the deputy director of the White House's Energy Policy Office, being responsible for the preparation of studies to establish the administration's energy policy and to coordinate activities of various federal agencies. It is in his present capacity as President and Chief Executive Officer of the American Petroleum Institute that Mr. DiBona speaks to us today on the subject, Energy, the Lessons Learned. Mr. DiBona.
Thank you, Mr. Weiss. I'm pleased to be here in Cleveland, and particularly here at the City Club, an historic institution where freedom of speech and fair debate have been enjoyed since your beginning in 1912. You can justly be proud of that record. Over the years, you've heard and interrogated scores of distinguished Clevelanders and other Ohioans who went on to Washington. Mayor Harold Burton, who went to the Supreme Court, Mayor Frank Lausche, who became governor and senator, Mayor Tom Burke, another senator, Mayor Tony Celebrezzi, who joined President Kennedy's cabinet, Senator Robert A. Taft, who almost became president, and many others, including another Ohio senator who today wants to become president. All of those speakers went from Ohio to Washington. I've reversed that direction. And I'd like to reverse some of the policies that Washington has followed in the past, because I think that it would make life considerably better for the people in Ohio and in the rest of the country. Specifically, I'd like to reverse our current policy on controlling through federal regulation the price of natural gas. I know how that sounds to you. It sounds as if I want natural gas prices to go even higher, just when 130,000 of your fellow Ohioans may have their gas shut off because they couldn't pay their winter bills. But in fact, a change in policy would help consumers. Now, of course, natural gas is not the only major part of the energy equation. Oil is another. Today, I want to discuss both with you. The nation has had a long learning experience with oil. So I'm going to use that experience as a way of talking about natural gas. Let me begin with two flat statements. The first is that Ohioans are far better off in gasoline, home heating oil, and industrial oil today than they were when those fuels were under government controls that were courageously removed by two presidents, one a Democrat and the other a Republican. The proof of that statement is easy to demonstrate. The second flat assertion is that Ohioans will be better off in natural gas under deregulation than they would be otherwise. That statement is also a certainty, although proving the future is admittedly somewhat more difficult than proven the past, as the battle now in Congress amply demonstrates. That battle reflects two basic schools of thought. One school is for tighter controls and a bigger federal government role in the natural gas business. The other school would move in the opposite direction, toward a free market in natural gas production. Fortunately for the consumer, to resolve that disagreement today, we don't have to speculate about the effects of the nation of more versus fewer government controls. Energy consumers now have learned about those effects. They've lived through 3 decades of natural gas controls, through a decade of oil and gasoline controls, and through oil and gasoline decontrol. Those experiences, viewed with clear 20/20 hindsight, teach us what we need to know. They show that such government controls simply don't protect consumers, and that decontrol does protect consumers. This does not mean that government should have no role in energy. Many elderly and low-income people have serious problems in trying to pay their fuel bills, whether for gas, electricity, or heating oil. The government should fully fund the programs that help those people, and the American Petroleum Institute strongly advocates such programs. The issue here is not controls versus decontrol. The issue is society's obligation to those who need assistance. And the government has a real and important role. The point is simply that we should deal with the problem of the needy directly and not cause energy chaos for the whole country by trying to handle the problem of the needy through elaborate price and allocation controls. And of course, the government has some other important roles, such as building a strategic petroleum reserve that can help protect our nation against future oil cutoffs and ensuring compliance with environmental standards. But the government should not try to control markets that are clearly competitive. I don't need to ask you to accept that in faith. You can look it up. You've lived through the sharp contrast between controls and decontrol. You remember the days in the 1950s and most of the 60s when oil was plentiful and cheap. A $5 bill bought you a tank full of gas and change, even in Gates Mills. Not many Americans cared in 1960 when a group of faraway nations formed an obscure organization called OPEC. However, by the early 1970s, things had changed. The government had imposed price controls on domestic oil in 1971. Not surprisingly, domestic production declined and supplies eventually became scarce. By mid-1973, the government had set up an allocation program. And throughout these years, we were becoming dangerously dependent on oil from unstable, faraway nations. In late 1973, it all hit home. The Arab nations imposed an oil embargo. Motorists sat in long gasoline lines by the hour, and pump prices went up as they sat. People were understandably surprised, confused, and angry. They didn't know much about OPEC. They didn't recognize what caused the gasoline lines. They didn't hear cogent explanations from the government, and they didn't hear too many from the industry. In fact, the shortage was quite small. Less than 5% of our total oil supplies. But it didn't seem small because the government stepped in to help. The government tried to manage that small shortage by imposing regulations on where, when, and how much fuel could be delivered at what price everywhere in the country. Washington didn't understand that to accomplish this sort of management successfully, the government had to second-guess the habits and decisions of millions of consumers and suppliers at home and abroad. Making those second guesses accurately has always been and always will be impossible. As a result, the market was widely distorted during that crisis. Many rural areas had plenty of fuel, while cities had long gasoline lines. Gasoline went to vacation spots, while tourists stayed home. Farmers generally had enough fuel, while truckers protested and tried to get more. Allocation schedules caused supplies to dry up at the end of each month. Scarce supplies were set aside for state governments that didn't have enough manpower to properly handle distribution. Most discouraging of all, the controls did not protect consumers from high prices. By holding down domestic prices initially, they kept demand high, so OPEC was able to push its prices even higher. In short, massive government intervention had only made a difficult situation more serious. But the lesson wasn't learned. The government role continued to expand after the embargo. Congress tightened the crude oil and gasoline price controls that had been imposed back in 1971. Oil prices were first frozen and then rolled back. If one set of government fixes did not work, try another. Inevitably, over the years, production continued to drop, demand mushroomed, and oil imports almost tripled. The nation remained vulnerable. And in 1979, it all happened again. Oil supplies were cut, this time by the Iranian Revolution. Once again, the shortage was small, less than 5%, but was greatly magnified by government mismanagement. Once again, consumers were confused and angry over gasoline lines and skyrocketing prices. And once again, the question was, how much should the government do? This time, however, one person was able to act on the lesson learned. After the crisis had passed, President Carter, by a courageous executive order, opposed by many in his own party, started to move the federal government out of the business of regulating crude oil and gasoline. In January 1981, President Reagan completed decontrol. Both presidents had seen the historical pattern. Both knew that controls had resulted in just the opposite of what their sponsors had expected. Rather than stemming the flow of imported oil, the controls had subsidized imports by discouraging domestic production and encouraging higher energy use. Rather than easing difficulties during foreign oil cutoffs, controls had turned manageable problems into crises. And rather than protecting consumers, controls ensured their vulnerability to new crises. The government simply could not, no matter how sincerely it tried, improve upon or even keep track of those millions of daily decisions that make up an effective, efficient energy market. Presidents Reagan and Carter both wisely concluded that decontrol would make us better able to handle future oil cutoffs. And all of us now know that is exactly what happened. Under decontrol of crude oil prices, exploration increased, discoveries increased, and for the first time in a decade, U.S. crude oil production outside of Alaska increased. Oil imports from OPEC went down sharply. The so-called international oil weapon was blunted. And there was a bonus, unexpected by many. That bonus was lower prices. In the 1970s, U.S. controls helped OPEC to overshoot on prices. Under decontrol, OPEC has cut its price for the first time in 23 years. Confirmation of the basic lesson came in the third oil crisis. You may not remember that one, because it didn't happen. But it could have happened when the Iran-Iraq War broke out in September 1980. The world then lost almost twice as much oil as it did during the 1979 Iranian Revolution. But there were no government allocations, no shortages, and no wild price jumps. Now, decontrol of U.S. oil cannot be given all the credit for the world's smooth handling of the potential crisis. But it is important to consider this. The U.S. share of the production loss from the Iran-Iraq War was more than 1 million barrels a day. But under decontrol, we had already reduced our oil imports by about twice that much every day. The American energy economy was in better shape to absorb a shortage, and this time the government did not bend the economy out of shape. Well, so much for that one part of the energy equation. Now let's look at the natural gas case, keeping in mind the lessons we took so long to learn with crude oil. The country has not decontrolled gas. As a direct result, the natural gas situation is chaotic. Price controls on natural gas were imposed some 30 years ago. Inevitably, as with oil, these controls eventually led to shortages, severe shortages in '77 that closed factories and schools, as you Ohioans know better than I. In 1978, Congress addressed the problem. Did they apply the oil lessons that the nation has learned? Unfortunately, they did not. While some advocated decontrol, others clung to the myth that controls help consumers, and these others demanded even more regulation. As a result, Congress enacted a bill that promised partial natural gas decontrol at the wellhead in 1985, but meanwhile imposed more elaborate and far-reaching federal controls. Once again, as it had done with oil, the government took something that in principle is quite simple, and with uncanny economic ignorance made it unbelievably complicated, inefficient, and unworkable. More specifically, the government divided natural gas, a single, uniform commodity, into 28 different legal categories with 28 sets of rules and 28 prices. Not surprisingly, in fact, totally predictably, the natural gas market today is a shambles. Production of high-cost gas is encouraged. Production of low-cost gas is discouraged. Imported gas that costs 2 to 3 times as much as U.S. gas is subsidized. Prices rise while supplies are plentiful. A major producing state finds it more attractive to import gas from other states than to use gas from its own wells. Some areas of the country are effectively locked out of the competition for new supplies of gas. And prices vary widely across the country, or even across a single city. I understand that right here in Cleveland, consumers on one side of the city have paid as much as 1/3 more for gas than consumers on the other side, simply because the two utilities have access to different government categories of gas. That gas burns the same and doesn't seem any different to you. But the government says it's different, and sure enough, your bill's different. No one is happy with this mess. Not the natural gas industry, and much more important, certainly not the public. Worst of all, the nation could face natural gas shortages again if production drops, as inevitably it will, under controls that distort the market. The obvious answer, I submit, is to look to the approach that worked in the past. The answer is to decontrol, gradually remove the absurdity of regulating 28 natural gas categories, and simultaneously protect consumers during the transition. This is exactly the approach of the bill proposed by President Reagan. Decontrol of natural gas under that approach would end the price differences, it would prevent shortages, and it would give consumers assured supplies at the lowest possible price. It worked with oil, as the record clearly shows. It will work just as well with natural gas, and the future record will show that just as clearly. Critics who claim otherwise simply choose to ignore the energy lessons learned in recent years. If you ask why, their answer is that natural gas is different than oil. Natural gas is not competitive. An angry citizen can't shop around for a new gas company. He or she is stuck with a monopoly supplier. That answer is nonsense. The legislation now on the books in Washington and the legislation under discussion does not apply to the end of the business served by the local distributor, a regulated monopoly. The decontrol being debated would apply to the other end of the business, out in the field, where more than 10,000 companies compete to explore for, produce, and sell natural gas. Price controls on thousands of gas producers make no more sense than would, say, similar controls on coal producers. Even though people can buy electricity from only one local electric company, which is regulated, the electric company can buy coal from many competitive producers who are not regulated. In the same way, local natural gas companies would continue to be regulated if controls on natural gas producers were lifted. But the critics continue to claim that natural gas prices can only go up. And they cite some outlandish figure, tens of billions of consumer dollars, if decontrol takes place. Or remember what they said when they fought against decontrol of gasoline. $2 a gallon gas. That's what they told you to expect. $1.15 is what I saw this morning at a station when I was coming in from the airport. Their projection for natural gas is just as wrong. It flies in the face of experience, and it ignores the reality of what is already happening with natural gas. The fact is that a small amount of natural gas is already decontrolled. And over the past year, prices for that natural gas have fallen dramatically. It is the controlled natural gas that has been rising. Events have already proven that decontrolled gas does indeed respond to the market, whether up or down. Now let's look more closely at what actually determines the price of natural gas. The average nationwide price of gas today, all those 28 categories, is quite close to the price that a free market would set. The free market price would be determined not by natural gas used in homes, but by competition between natural gas and the heavy oil used in utilities and industry. These large customers can and do switch back and forth to either natural gas or heavy oil. So the price of natural gas can't rise much above the price of heavy oil, or else industry will shift to oil, creating a nationwide surplus of gas. In an uncontrolled market, this surplus would drive gas prices right back down, just as we are seeing today with gas that is decontrolled. Under decontrol, natural gas, like oil, would respond to the forces of supply and demand, and everyone, including consumers, would have less fear of future shortages. The lesson of all this experience is clear and simple. Government controls don't work. The energy market does work. The market, of course, is not the property of a few large faceless corporations. Each of you is part of it. It functions effectively every day through millions of decisions by millions of individual consumers and suppliers. People decide what, when, and where to buy. Prices can go up or down, and supplies go wherever they're needed. That market in oil, working in textbook style, has weakened OPEC and protected consumers the way no amount of government controls could. When that market is free to function without interference, consumers are assured that ample supplies will go to the right places at the right times at the lowest prices. The idea is simple, logical, and at long last, I would hope, a lesson thoroughly learned. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you very much, Mr. DiBona. Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are listening to Mr. Charles DiBona of the American Petroleum Institute. In just a moment, we'll turn to our question period, but first a few announcements. As most of you know, the City Club continues to grow. And in case you don't know, it is growing. We're very, very pleased. Every week we have new members who are joining with us to support Cleveland's historic citadel of free speech. People from all walks of life, all sections of the community. This club is open to all. Everyone is welcome. We ask those of you who are members to bring your friends as guests, show them around, tell them about our programs, our educational programs, and invite them to join. We need to keep growing to remain strong. Give us a call at 621-0082, and there you will obtain information about membership in the City Club of Cleveland. Today again we have with us students from area high schools who are participating with us in our Living Seminars program, which we sponsor in cooperation with the Cleveland Public Schools and Cuyahoga Community College. Today we have students from West Technical, Max S. Hayes, Chagrin Falls, Valley Forge, Maple Heights, Bay, Euclid, and the School of Science. Would they stand please to receive our welcome? Thank you, and they will be meeting with Mr. DiBona, as you know, for their own seminar right after our forum here. I'd like to announce two forums that will be taking place next week. There will be a special Wednesday forum, midweek, next Wednesday, April 20th. This forum will be in honor of National Volunteer Week, and the City Club will present this forum, at which Dr. John Yankee will be our speaker. Dr. Yankee of Case Western Reserve University's School of Applied Social Sciences will speak on the subject, The Challenge to Volunteerism in the 80s and the 90s. At our regular forum next Friday, on April 22nd, our speaker will be Governor Charles S. Robb of the state of Virginia. Be sure to make your reservations early for each of these important addresses. Now we're ready for our questions for Mr. DiBona. We have two microphones, one in the front with Alan Davis, one in the rear with Robert Conrad. Please raise your hand to be recognized, and we'll go on with the first question.
Thank you.
Mr. DiBona, I'm an old New Yorker, and I'm sure the native Clevelanders don't need me to champion one of their greats. But in your opening sentences, you gave a list of men who went from Cleveland to Washington. Was it by bias or oversight that you neglected to mention Newton D. Baker?
Well, it was hardly a complete list.
Mr. DiBona, there's a story in this morning's paper about billion-dollar subsidies to business. It reads, eliminate special subsidies and other tax breaks to big business, and almost half the federal budget or the federal deficit would disappear. One of these deficits are oil tax breaks, which amount to $5.74 billion. My question is, when are the corporations going to get off our backs and start paying their taxes?
Well, let me tell you something about the taxes that the oil industry pays. I don't know precisely what so-called break you're referring to. The large oil companies no longer have percentage depletion, which used to be the whipping horse of most people who made the statement that you made. In fact, if you take the top 23 oil companies, they paid last year about $6.5 billion in direct income taxes, and they paid $16.2 billion in an excise tax that's called the windfall profits tax, but in fact is an excise tax on the production of oil. So they paid about $22 billion from about 23 oil companies. That's a very substantial tax. It ultimately is paid by the people who buy oil because it means that that money is not reinvested for the production of additional supplies of oil, and therefore will not contribute to the reduction in the amounts of imports, and therefore in the price that OPEC charges. But it's entirely appropriate that industry pay taxes. and they in fact do.
Mr. DiBona, my question relates to the competition between natural gas and oil for some major industries such as steel production. It seems that prior to about 10 years ago, the steel mills used oil primarily, and your comments today would indicate that the price of oil provided a ceiling so that natural gas prices would remain below that to serve that industry. Is it your prediction that steel will continue to use natural gas, or is there any possibility that they will return to oil?
Well, ultimately, what any particular company is going to use will depend upon the relative prices of it, and that was the point I was trying to make, that one caps the other. There's a peculiarity of what's going on right now that shows, I think, the absurdity of the existing regulations. There was a provision of the 1978 Act which required, called incremental pricing, which required that any increases in price at the wellhead of natural gas had to be passed directly on to industrial consumers before any of it could be passed on to private homeowners, private consumers at home. So, and until such time as the price of natural gas to the industrial user got up to the price of oil, because the price of gas was controlled below oil. Well, that process went on until the price of natural gas did get up to the price of oil, and then the price of oil has started falling. Well, the Public Utilities Commissions did not want to reduce the price of natural gas to industrial users while it was then rising to homeowners, because they feared the political repercussions of doing that. So they let the price of natural gas stay above the price of oil. What happened was the industrial users, to the tune of about 1/3 of a trillion cubic feet of natural gas, or 150 to 200,000 barrels a day of oil, depending on which way you look at it, have shifted from natural gas to oil. Now, that meant that the pipelines and the facilities supplying natural gas to the household consumer had to be paid for, because they must be paid for under the regulatory scheme, by the household users. So they had to cover not only the cost of the capacity supplying them, but the unused capacity that used to supply industrial users. Meanwhile, natural gas is being shut in the United States, and we end up importing more oil. So by the absurdity of this regulation, instead of letting the market have some impact on that, we have increased the import of oil for that purpose, therefore helped strengthen OPEC to that minor extent. We have increased the price to the household consumer, and we forced industrial users to shift from gas that at the moment is in a little better supply to imported oil. That's government regulation in a nutshell for you.
Mr. DiBona, I have two questions. One concerns oil and the other gas. Lately, I've read 3 or 4 times, almost as though someone is orchestrating the delivery of the message, that somehow it would be a bad thing if oil prices fell too far. That countries would go broke, banks would go broke, third world countries would have unemployment, and so on. I'd like your comments about that. My question regarding gas is, why are you in favor of gradual decontrol instead of immediate decontrol if decontrol is a good thing?
With regard to the first question, I think there's no doubt that the economy has benefited from the decline in oil prices. Not every oil producer has benefited by that. There are 1,000 people in the Southwest, producers, who've gone bankrupt. One bank has collapsed because of it. But if you look overall at the national interest, it has been beneficial to this country that the price of oil has declined. And that has been a direct benefit and a direct effect of the decision to decontrol oil. Now, further declines would have some benefits. There's no question about it. How long those declines could be sustained before you would have a reversal of the process, I don't know. There's plenty of oil in the world today, not in the United States. We still import about a quarter of our oil. The amount of drilling in the United States, because of the price decline, has dropped significantly. That is, we're using about half as many rigs as we were a year and a half ago. If the decline is very sharp and sustained, there'll be some less domestic production. People will continue to, will start to increase their consumption of oil. We will start importing more, and you'll start an upcycle. How quickly that'll occur, I don't know. That's one of the effects of a very sharp decline of oil. But to say that in the short run, this has not been a benefit is just plain wrong. It has been. It's helped inflation, and it's helped the employment picture. On the second question, which was the
Why not deregulate it immediately?
oh, why not deregulate it immediately? Well, you know, from an economic standpoint and as an economist, I agree with you. It would work better. From a political standpoint, it's would be almost impossible to get people to agree to that. From a, and then I think there's a third problem, and that is there are an immense number of very complicated contractual arrangements in the petroleum industry, and one of the aspects of the President's program is to try and work some system out whereby those can be rearranged. They were all written at a time when people anticipated controls forever, and so they generate some unique and special problems. That is, it isn't easy to come from a heavily regulated industry to an unregulated industry, and so one, I think, can argue logically, even if you're an economist, for a transition period. And I think that's the long and short of it.
Mr. DiBona, there's an issue which I'm not sure has been satisfactorily answered in my mind, and I'd be very interested in your comments about it. Can we expect the industry to protect our long-range limited resources in oil and gas for future generations?
Well, there is a perception that people have that there is a finite amount of oil and gas in the ground, and of course there is. What people fail to understand about that is that more can be found if you put more effort into the discovery of it, and more can be gotten from an individual operation or well if you invest more in it. That is why decontrolling, for example, even old oil and gas, that is gas that's been discovered in the past, or oil that's been discovered in the past, the decontrol of such oil and gas actually produces more from those wells because people can afford to invest more in it. So what will happen in the future, and the market will help us do this rationally, will be we will look for the cheapest gas, the cheapest oil. We will develop that. Increasingly over time, we will have to move to more expensive and distant areas, places like Alaska, which we're already into. And when that source becomes inadequate, there are massive hydrocarbons in the United States that can be converted into liquid and gas fuels, like coal. I mean, we have half of the world's supply of coal, and at present consumption rates, we have several hundred years' worth, for example. There's shale, there's tar sands, there are a number of other sources. So my perception of the future is let people find the least cost sources now. That's going to make this country wealthier and better able to compete in the world. As time passes, we'll go to more and more difficult and expensive sources, And we have to rely a little bit, I think, on the ingenuity of man to come up with some other solutions. And that will take time.
Mr. DiBona, do you feel that the BTU content of fuels, more than just the gas and oil, will eventually become a basis of pricing?
Well, to a large extent, it is for certain fuels. For example, the BTU price of oil, of heavy oil, and natural gas in a free market are equalized. There's some transportation differences, but for industrial uses, they will be equalized. But there are other fuels that the price of gasoline will never equate on a BTU basis probably with the price of coal. You can use gasoline in circumstances where you can't use coal. The cost of burning coal involves certain environmental expenditures that are very large, which will affect its BTU price. So I don't expect that there would be uniform BTU pricing, except at those points where there is direct competition. And I've described one of them to you here today.
Mr. DiBona, you said in your remarks that many elderly and low-income people have serious problems in trying to pay their fuel oil bills, and that you and the American Petroleum Institute strongly support programs that help these people, government programs that help these people. I appreciate your sensitivity on this issue, but the problem is that the people in the government who support your economic theories of government non-intervention are the same people who are supporting cuts in these programs. What can we do about that?
Well, all I can tell you is what I've done. The board of directors of the American Petroleum Institute support the position of adequate and full funding for that program. I have so written a letter to the chairman of the committees responsible for that in the Congress. We've done a number of other things. We've put together pamphlets with the American Association of Retired People, which we have distributed to all congressional offices to help people locate the place where they can get that kind of support. And we recognize that there's a real and immediate and clear problem here. Our concern is that that be dealt with directly, and that we just don't screw up energy policy in the United States and cause the price of oil to be higher than it has to be, and that we create shortages in trying to deal with that very real problem by contorting the whole of energy policy to try and solve that problem through that very awkward mechanism. Let's deal with it and deal with it directly.
Mr. DiBona, we're just a week or two into a new increase in the gasoline tax. Do you think it would be good public policy to continue to increase the gasoline tax should the cost of gasoline decline? To the layman, it seems to make sense in that it would help solve the federal deficit problem and also keep the incentives strong for conservation. I'd like to know what you and your institute think of the federal gasoline tax.
Well, the present federal gasoline tax is largely being spent. That is, 4 of the additional 5 cents is being spent to rebuild the roads in the United States. And so, therefore, to that extent, it's a use tax. The other cent is used for mass transit. The clear relationship there, I mean, the relationship there isn't quite as clear to me. The argument being that if people get on a bus, they won't be driving on the roads, and therefore the roads will be freer for the people who drive. That was how that was made into that's the rationalization for it being a use tax. From that standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, and it's appropriate that the people who use the roads should pay for the repair and maintenance of the roads, and so we have never objected to that. We think it makes a lot of sense. It is also true that as you increase the price of gasoline, you reduce the consumption of gasoline, and that makes sense. But you can, in some audiences, a little hard to say this, but you can overconserve too. I mean, you can end up spending a lot of money on conservation that costs you more than the amount you save in the fuel not used. And so one ought to be a little careful about that.
Mr. DiBona, in your criticism about Washington, I noticed you failed to comment about that renowned music critic James Watt. You represent an energy producer. You represent an energy producer. I belong to an environmental group. And my understanding of American history is the politics of consensus. I wonder why energy producers continue to support a man who has polarized these two groups, who has polarized such diverse groups as the American Indian, the Beach Boys. And I wonder why you continue to support this man. We want to be able to, as they would say, reach out and touch. But with Jim Watts, not with a 10-foot pole.
Well, the API, you might think this is an evasion of your question. The API's actually worked pretty continuously and I think effectively with most of the environmental groups, and has, I think, established a reasonable working relationship with them. We've exposed all of our activities to rather kind of critical review. We've taken people up and look at the Alaskan pipeline route before it was constructed. We've taken the heads of all of the environmental groups up to look at the whole operation after it was completed, and got a lot of interesting comments from them. We think we're pretty good environmental citizens, regardless of who we support on what.
Mr. DiBona, I wonder if you'd amplify your comments on old gas. Now, old gas, for everyone, I think you're aware, is the cheap gas, 1977 prior, which represents at least some cushion for people amidst some of the high prices. Now, I've read that the major oil producers are the owners of the bulk of this cheap gas, and if decontrol were to happen either gradually or all at once, that there would be a real financial windfall for them.
Yeah. Well, he used several words that people who are familiar with this fight understand, like cushion and so forth. I'll have to go back a little and explain to you what he's talking about, right, and then answer his question. These 28 categories of gas have, I don't think quite 28 prices, but pretty near that number of different prices. It depends upon how deep the gas is found, when the well was drilled, how many feet it is laterally from another well, whether it's offshore or onshore, the kind of porosity of the rock from which it's gotten, and a few other arcane distinctions. It has nothing to do with the gas once you get it up, okay? So there are some categories of gas called old gas are from wells that were drilled before 1977. That gas is controlled at a price of roughly $1 a thousand cubic feet. The average price of gas in the United States from domestic sources around 2.5, and some of the imported gas is around anywhere from 4 to 7. And there are some gas that were actually sold from very, very deep wells as high as $11 a thousand cubic feet. So you got this great big mess of prices. The old gas, if a particular pipeline has contracted to it a lot of this old gas, it is said to have a cushion, by which it means that they can go out and buy imported gas, for example, at $4 or $7 a thousand cubic feet, because they can average it against the $1 gas, the gas cushion, and the average of those is still low enough so they can sell it. Okay. Now, one of the problems that has been happening is that, of course, it's encouraged overpricing for very expensive gas, because only gas that's very expensive to find is decontrolled. So this law, among other things, has encouraged people to go for the most expensive gas and not look for the cheap gas, because they can't pay over the very small controlled price for the cheap gas, but they can pay anything for the very expensive gas. And therefore, it's caused people to look for very expensive gas and not to look for the cheap gas. That's another one of the wonders of this act. Now, his argument is that if we decontrol it all, it's all going to go to the same price. And if it all goes to the same price, we're going to use our resources more efficiently because the gas that can be found at the lowest price is the gas that's first going to be looked for. I mean, kind of a radical idea to some people. Now, but also the gas that is presently under control will all go to that price eventually, or soon enough. Therefore, it's a question of who gains or who loses that he's referring to. And he says, well, these big companies have most of the old gas. That's the assertion. Turns out that that's not correct. Now, what you have to look at is all of the gas that an individual company has. So if you take the top 20 producers of gas in the United States, and incidentally, the top 20 producers only produce about 50% of the gas, 48% to be exact. And you look at the average price of all of their gas, it's within 6% of the average price of all gas in the United States. So the mix of the gas they have must be very close to the average mix all across the United States. So if you decontrol, they are not going to be particularly benefited. On average, everybody's going to be treated about the same. Of those top 20 companies, there are 10 that are above the average for the rest of the country and 10 that are below the average. So within that 20 companies, there will be some that benefit more than others and some that lose. Under the President's program, they believe that the price of natural gas will fall, not rise, incidentally. The estimate of the Department of Energy is that if their program goes through, the price of natural gas will fall between 10 and 30 cents a thousand cubic feet next year. So not only is there no real distinction between large and small producers, there may be between large producers and between individual small producers, but on net, they will not get an increase.
I think in what you just said, there's probably some sort of an answer to the question I'm just about to ask, but I'm going to ask it. When you read in the paper... It's not simple. When you read in the paper that they're exploring for oil off the coast of the Atlantic in water 5 or 10 miles deep, I don't know. It's just hard to conceive that that isn't awfully expensive oil and gas.
It is.
I contend that back in 1979, when they decontrolled oil, that it might have been premature, because when it was controlled, you said we were discouraging production of oil and gas here, and we were buying it from OPEC and any other world supplier.
That's right.
Weren't we better off to continue to do that and use up their supplies first? Because our supplies in this country are so expensive to get.
Well, it all depends upon what they're willing to sell it to us for. I mean, that's the problem, you know. If OPEC would sell us the oil and gas at very low prices, we ought to use all theirs up. The trouble is that if we don't look for our own oil and gas and try and find it most efficiently, then what happens is we import very large amounts from them. In fact, we were importing close to 9 million barrels a day. We're now importing under 4, you know, in 77 and 78. That makes it very easy for them to decide that they're going to push the price up. And they got the price to very, very high levels. At very high levels, we can find a lot more oil and gas in the United States. So it's a Hobson's choice. It is a real problem. But we're going to have lower prices and more efficient use of fuel in this country, and we're going to have more jobs and a stronger economy if we simply let the market operate, and that includes going out offshore and finding oil and gas in deep water if it can be fought and brought in at a price lower than we can get OPEC to sell it to us for. And in the process, we'll make OPEC sell it to us for less.
Mr. DiBona, I have a two-part question. You were scheduled to be our speaker here last year, and you canceled within 48 hours for security reasons. Question one is, can you tell us what they were? And question two is, why do you feel more secure this year?
Well, actually, it was a lot longer than 48 hours before, and quite frankly, the reason was I was informed that a group, that first you were in temporary quarters, and that a group of people who for whom I had personal experience would in fact disrupt the meeting. And having had that experience of major disruptions of 3 API meetings, it was suggested to me that it made a lot more sense to wait until you got into permanent quarters and to accept for a later date. And that's what I did.
Mr. DiBona, on the, you said on the way in from the airport, you saw gasoline for $1.15. Now,
you want to know the station?
It's a higher gas. In some places it's cheaper. Of that amount of $1.15, how much is represented by taxes, both the federal sales tax, the state sales tax, the excise tax that's represented by the windfall profit tax? Approximately how much would be
well, it depends upon the precise source of the oil, because the tax on oil is just as complex as this tax on, as the control on natural gas. But there's 21 cents in excise tax at the pump, 12 cents federal and 12 cents local Ohio tax, and 9-cent federal tax. Beyond that, the combination of the so-called windfall tax, which is another excise tax, plus the severance tax paid to the state from which the oil was produced, plus the income tax of the oil company, has to be half of the price. The sum of all those has to be half of the price. I don't know precisely what it is. Thank you.
Mr. DiBona, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. DiBona. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Our City Club Forum is adjourned.